For the Land Use and Transportation Council.
Recording in progress.
Okay, we'll call the order of the Land Use, Transportation, and Council Committee regular meeting to order. First piece, we have Councilmember Tran to my right, and myself here as the chair, and I think everybody else is out of town, so on this nice sunny day. So we will, oh, and I see Lydia. Thank you, Lydia.
I'm here also.
You're there also?
Yeah,
Okay, and Lydia is here with us also. So, and please, Lydia, sometimes it doesn't show up on the screen, so just make sure you cut in if you need to, if you have a question, okay? Okay, we'll go to public comment. Do we have any? No public comment. Do we have any committee business? No committee business. We'll move to approval of the minutes.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the minutes, May 5th, 2025.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're going to item B, the 2023 asphalt overlay project acceptance. Mr. Cole.
Good evening, Council Chair, Council Hahn. I am here to present project acceptance of the 2023 asphalt overlay project. Maybe. There we go. Policy question I have before you this evening, if I can move this, is should council accept the 2023 asphalt overlay project constructed by Icon Materials LLC as complete? Action needed. City Council must accept the work as complete to meet Washington State Department of Revenue, Economic Security Department, and Department of Labor and Industries L&I requirements. Financial summary for you. Authorized maximum contract amount was a little over $3.7 million. Construction contract finished out at just over $3 million, leaving a surplus of $704,419.46. Options considered this evening is options 1 or options 2. Mayor recommends forwarding option 1 to the June 17th City Council consent agenda for approval. As always, I'm available for any questions you may have.
Do you have a question, Councilman?
No, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for completing this project under the budget.
It's a pleasure.
Good job. Thank you.
My one question is, the $700,000 go back into the asphalt overlay fund?
It does. So it stays, this is a restricted account, so it stays in that restricted account and will effectively roll forward into funding that's available for the overlay next year.
Okay. And when do we start that project?
The
For next year?
25 one or the 26 one?
Oh, wait, I guess we start summer for 25.
Yeah, so summer 25 is already awarded. They're starting shortly. 26 is the list of streets has already been approved by council, and it's in design right now. And it'll go out to bid ideally in December, January.
Okay. Okay, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to forward option 1 to June 17, 2025 consent agenda for approval.
And I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to item number 3, which is the Pacific Highway Non-Motorized Corridor Phase 1 request for additional funds. Mr. Mulkey, you got the fun one.
Yes, Chair Dovey, Councilmember Tran. My name is John Mulkey, and let's see, I will start this. I am the Senior Civil Engineer for the City of Federal Way. I am presenting the Pacific Highway Non-Motorized Corridor Phase 1 request for additional funds. The policy question is, should the council authorize an increase in the contract expenditures for the Pacific Highway Non-Motorized Corridor Phase 1 project? This is a picture of the trail in the current condition. You can see we're very, very close to getting it done. The brown is just the grass hasn't grown in, but that's the general condition. But the path, it'll have illumination and stuff running up it. So cost increase. The city is requesting an increase of $100,000 to the contract. Cost increases were due to unexpected utility conflicts as well as cost overruns and traffic control. Funding for the overrun is coming from within the project budget due to a decrease in construction management costs from performing that work in-house. So this is our funding summary showing we have, with the total expenditures, if we add the $100,000, we'll have enough money to cover the cost of the project with our funding. And so the options consider authorize staff to increase the contract expenditures for the project by $100,000 for a new maximum amount for the contract of $2,948,548, or do not approve an increase in contract expenditures for the Pacific Highway non-motorized project and provide direction to staff. And the mayor recommends option 1, and I'm available for questions.
So I do have one question. The 100,000's coming out of the project just because we managed it ourselves, correct?
Correct.
So why are we going to approval to do that? It's just because you had it in a different category? Because you still have the same money?
Right, it's the amount that we can pay when we apply for the contract with the contractor. We have a certain amount that we're allowed to pay the contractor plus a contingency of 10% in this case. And in this case, we're over that 10% contingency with the extra costs that we've incurred. So the council has to approve us to pay more into that contract to exceed the amount of the contract originally.
Right, but the money is not, you're not truly over 100,000 in the project. You're just moving it from
Correct.
the
We're not-
management to
We're
the
not over the
contractor.
project
Correct.
budget. That is correct.
Right, and some of this money we're going to get refunded from Lake Haven and from AT&T as well, because of some of that was for the utility conflicts.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of being able to pay the contractor more money than what we originally allowed in the
Got it.
contract.
I guess it's how you say it. Because you're really still within budget. You're just.
We're within the project budget, but
Yeah.
because of the value of these contracts, they have to come to council for award. So the specific company that we are paying has a maximum that we're allowed to pay. So what we're really asking tonight is increase that maximum for the specific company, even though the project, as you said, is still within budget and there's no general impact to the overall project.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, go right ahead, Susan.
Thank you. Will there be benches along this trail for people to rest on?
For this portion, there's going to be benches on the very north end down by Lakota Park. We're putting in benches at that location. And as we extend the project, we're going to add additional benches at additional locations. So we have benches down that are going to be down near, Sacagawea Park.
Sahali, or Sacagawea, yeah.
Sacagawea Park, there's going to be some benches, a bench down there. We're also going to be adding a bench up at 288th when we do phase 2. So there'll be some stopping and benches and stuff added in as well.
Great.
So at this point, there's just one bench that will be located by the Sacagawea Park,
Correct,
and eventually there'll be more.
correct.
When will that happen, eventually?
Well, we have the contract, the grant for the next project is, we're supposed to go out to add next spring. So we're going to be completing this project this spring, and then we are going to be doing the culvert project this summer, and then we should be into construction on that next portion next spring. So we should be roll right into that again and start getting that to 288th next summer.
So then this portion will always just have the one bench, or did I misunderstand you?
No, there'll just be one bench in this phase. The next phase will add additional benches.
In other parts of the trail?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Do we have a motion or a question?
I'm ready to make the motion.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I move to forward option 1 to the June 17, 2025 consent agenda for approval.
I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to item 3, which is, item D, commute trip reduction CTR ordinance and Federal Way CTR plan. Mr. Howard.
Good evening, Chair and Committee. I'm John Howard, Transportation Planner and Commute Trip Reduction Implementer for the City of Federal Way, and here to present to you the trip reduction ordinance amendment and CTR plan. The policy question is, should the council approve an ordinance amending Chapter 8.10 of the Federal Way Municipal Code and adopt the plan? A little bit of background information for you. In 1991, the CTR Act was passed, which required the cities to develop and deliver a plan. It must be updated every 4 years. Those updates are usually done, they're minor updates that are done administratively. The plan itself outlines benefits, strategies, and targets, things of that nature, to help us give guidance to our employee transportation coordinators and such. The last major update was done in 2013, and it is a requirement for grant eligibility. It's not anticipated to have a financial impact on the city, and the city receives grant funds from WashDOT to implement. The ordinance amendment itself updates city code to be consistent with state CTR law and WashDOT administrative guidelines. It streamlines the code, removes some jargon. The options are considered are to approve the ordinance amendment and plan concurrently, modify them, or reject them. I just want to let the committee know that the plan is currently approved by Puget Sound Regional Council and WashDOT in December, and then January by WashDOT. So the plan is currently approved. We just wanted to clean up the code and make the code consistent with the plan as such. And the mayor's recommendation is option 1. Any questions?
Anyone have questions? Okay. Seeing none, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on June 17, 2025.
I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the adoption of the 2026-31 Transportation Improvement Program. Mr. Perez.
Good evening.
I'm trying to remember when the first one of these I've sat in. Must have been in 96 or 90, back in the day when you first did the first one, right?
So actually, I only observed the 96 one.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've pretty much taken it from there.
Yeah, I remember every many years you come up with this great program.
Yeah, well, this one's a little shorter than usual.
Good.
So, policy question is, should the council authorize staff to proceed with the adoption of the TIP on our council meeting on June 17th? So, as Chair Dovey has heard many times, this outlines the 6-year plan for transportation-related capital projects. It's updated annually. It is a requirement for grant eligibility. It must be financially constrained for at least the first 3 years, conform to air quality requirements, and needs to be adopted after a public hearing. Prioritization criteria that the council adopted a few years ago are listed here. I won't read them all. But note that basically a couple of them are related to level of service and concurrency. We have 3 measures of safety and whether it's supportive of high occupancy vehicles and non-motorized traffic. So this is what it looks like on a map. Emphasis on non-motorized projects, providing some connections, and a few good overlays there in blue. So we've completed several projects in the past year. 2 overlays, the roundabout at 344th and 27th Southwest, the regional trail plan, and the conceptual design and feasibility analysis of the grade separation, also known as the DIP. We have no new projects proposed for this year. So with that, options considered is to approve the resolution adopting the TIP as presented on June 17th, or do not forward the draft document and provide direction to staff. Mayor's recommendation is to forward option 1 for that approval. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Seeing no questions?
Oh, I have a question.
Okay, there you are. I'm glad you spoke up,
Oh.
Susan.
There I am.
Yeah.
So Rick, are there no new projects for this year because of funding issues?
That is a contributing factor. Workload is another one, and so right now we just started working on the Street Safety for All plan, and so that will probably generate a list of new safety projects. So not having new information for that, we decided to not include any additional safety projects until we have that list. So, but yeah, there's no new capacity project, concurrency failures that we're looking at in this time frame. So didn't feel the need to add any new ones.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for what you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councilman Tran?
Mr. Chair, I move to forward the proposed resolution to the public hearings on June 17, 2025 for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Passed. Okay, we'll now move to item F, which is concrete suite beveling on-call contract approval to award. Mr. Larson.
Right. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Council. My name is Jared Larson. I am with the Public Works Department. I am the Operations Manager. There we go. Okay. I am here tonight to present authorization to award the concrete sidewalk beveling on-call contract. Policy question, should council authorize award of the concrete sidewalk beveling on-call contract to the lowest responsible bidder? A little bit of background. So sidewalk maintenance includes potential trip hazard removal. One way to correct these potential hazards is to saw or grind the high side of the panel to be even with the adjacent panel. This is an ongoing maintenance program, and staff continue to identify additional areas requiring maintenance. We did have a previous contract which expired last year. Here is just a background photo. This shows an uplifted panel, and then this shows after the panel has been ground, it is then flush with the adjacent panel. Additional background information. So we went out through the Small Works roster process and received 3 bids. This is a public works maintenance contract in the amount not to exceed $350,000 for a 3-year term with the option for 1-year extension. And then this is funded out of the Streets General 101 Maintenance Fund and Motor Vehicle Excise Tax. So options considered, authorize award of the concrete sidewalk beveling on-call contract to Precision Concrete Cutting Incorporated. They're the lowest responsible bidder in an amount not to exceed $350,000 for a 3-year term with the option for 1-year extension. Or option 2, do not authorize award of this contract and provide direction to staff. The mayor recommends option 1. Are there any questions?
I have one question. If this was in front of someone's house, they would be responsible to repair it, correct? And we would do it and send them a bill?
In some circumstances, yes. It depends on where the damage is originating from.
Okay, so a tree lifting the panel, is that the homeowner's
Yes.
responsibility?
Yep.
So where we get involved is if it's like a storm sewer collapse where it's our infrastructure that
Sure.
collapses the sidewalk, then obviously we're responsible.
Right.
This contract, while it can be used for that, and there's a council agreed a couple of years ago to create a process that allowed us to do that. Before, we couldn't do this at all.
Right.
Where this is principally used, though, is along the arterials. So where it's not in front of homeowners. So on the arterials, the city is responsible.
Right.
Because it's typically our street trees that are between the road and the sidewalk that's causing the issue. So that's what this contract covers. It's not really for in the neighborhoods.
Okay, so it wouldn't be, if someone has a sidewalk in front of their house that is deemed their responsibility, we contract with these people, they go fix it, and we bill.
We can use this contract for that. Reality is the majority of it's along the arterials, where it's the city's responsibilities.
Okay.
But yes, that process is still in play. We still use it. There's a number of homeowners that have used it for that explicitly.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Any other questions out there?
I have a question.
Go right ahead, Susan.
I guess it's just you and me asking questions tonight, but
Oh, no, it's great. That's what we,
so EJ, if the sidewalk is beveled or it's painted pink or whatever to warn people that it's not even, if someone were to get hurt there, are we still responsible for that?
That's a complicated question, and I think
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. It's definitely helpful in terms of the city's liability if it is marked. In other words, it's less likely that we'd be found liable for that, but it's not a sure thing. It's not if you mark it, you're never responsible for a trip and fall.
Okay, thank you.
okay. Any other questions before we have a motion? Seeing none, do we, Mr. Tran?
Mr. Chair, I move to forward option 1 to the June 17, 2025 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll now move on to the SWIM Small CIP Stormwater Structure Repairs. Mr. Larson.
Okay, I am here to present the SWIM Small CIP Stormwater Structure Repairs Contract. And policy question, should City Council authorize staff to proceed with preparing and bidding the SWIM Small CIP Stormwater Structure Repairs and return to LUTC and Council for authorization to award? Background information, so within the SWIM Capital Improvement Program, there is a perpetual annual small CIP project. This is budgeted at $150,000 per year. This is intended for larger maintenance tasks, minor construction projects, and purchase of equipment to support maintenance activities. After review of the system, there is emergent need of failing stormwater structures within the roadways. The majority of these structures have failing top sections and frames. All of the locations are within highly traveled corridors, and staff does repair and replace several structures each year. However, this need has exceeded our capability to complete this by the end of the year. Here's a map of the proposed areas and broken up into schedules. As you can see, the areas highlighted in red are each area. Primarily, this is along Pacific Highway. There are a few areas along South 320th, again, Southwest 340th, and South 356th Street. Available budget, so this is under the SWIM Small CIP of $150,000, broken down to $10,000 for design and inspection, $125,000 for construction contract, and $12,500 for contingency, with an estimated total of $147,500. Mayor's recommendation, authorize staff to proceed with preparing and bidding the SWIM Small CIP Stormwater Structure Repairs Contract and return to council for authorization and award. Are there any questions?
So my question is, when this contract is awarded, you had a whole lot of red spots on 99. Will those all get repaired, whatever needs to be done fairly quickly? Or is this for, I mean,
So the,
how's that work?
the goal would be to have this done by the end of the year. You know, contractors, the favorable time would do this would be August, July, August. But we do have to go out, solicit bids, return to LUTC, return to council for authorization, execute the contract, and then proceed. I
it's
haven't
gonna
worked out the,
take a while.
What's that?
It's gonna take a while. I mean, most of these structures are 1 to 2 days minimum to replace per structure. So I mean, you're looking at 30 to 60 days of work. So it's gonna take some time. I mean, it's work that has to happen. I mean, there's
Right.
not a lot of recourse here, but obviously we will do our best to minimize the impacts to the traveling public. But, you know, there will be lane closures, not road closures, but lane closures associated with this.
And then next year, there'll be needed to be another one because the structures continue to deteriorate? Or is this fix it once and not,
So it won't be these structures, certainly.
yeah, of course, they're fixed.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, to Jared's point, we look every year at the system holistically and identify the biggest need, and that's what this project specifically targets. So we've done everything from pipelining to this sort of work before. Last year, we bought equipment to make it easier for staff to get in and do some work that we needed to do to meet our permit requirements. So we'll go through the same exercise again next year and identify what's the greatest need. Certainly, there is absolutely an argument to do this again next year with another schedule. Whether that's the greatest need or not, I don't really know as I'm sitting here today, though.
Okay. Any other questions from any other council members? Okay, let's,
All right, let's not. I move to forward option 1 to the June 17, 2025 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Now we'll go to rear yard parking limits. This is a good one. Mr. Nevin.
Good evening, Chair Dovey and Committee Member Tran and council members. Keith Niven, Community Development Director. So this evening we have proposed code amendments. The policy question in front of the City Council is, should the City Council approve the proposed code amendments to limit the number of vehicles parked on portions of single-family properties? So this started with a photograph. This photograph is taken of someone's neighbor's backyard. And it came into code compliance. And the answer right now is we can't do anything about this. So unless our code compliance officers receive permission from a property owner, they cannot go into somebody's backyard. That is not something that can happen. So what we could do is try to assess whether these vehicles are operable. And from somebody's backyard window, this would be a difficult case to bring forward. So what we're proposing is to add into the city code a provision that would limit basically the area in blue to a maximum of 4 vehicles. The portion in red right now on this diagram is covered already in city code, talking about how you could potentially park in front of the structure. And so really just what we're talking about is the backyard behind the house, potentially on the side yard if there's a wide enough room to park and not be in a side yard setback. So the code amendments need to be clear on these 3 criteria, which is the proposed amendment is consistent with the applicable provisions of the comprehensive plan. The second one is the proposed amendment bears a substantial relation to public health, safety, and welfare. And the third is the proposed amendment is in the best interest of the residents of the city, and staff feel like this proposed amendment satisfies these 3 criteria. Options considered for the council is approve the proposed ordinance or do not approve the proposed ordinance and provide direction to staff. This is technically called a packet oops. So the ordinance that's in your packet did not have this diagram. As the city attorney and I read through this proposed code amendment, it doesn't read real clear. When you read 4 detached dwelling units, a maximum of 4 vehicles may be parked or stored outside of the area located between the primary dwelling unit and the front property line. For purposes of the subsection, vehicles parked or stored inside a completely enclosed building do not count towards the 4 vehicles on lot maximum. We felt like a diagram needed to be in the code itself so that people could actually see what we're talking about. So we agreed before we went to the Planning Commission to add this to the ordinance. Unfortunately, the version of the ordinance in your packet did not include this figure. So hopefully, if you guys want to move this forward for first reading, the motion should be amended as shown on this slide. And with that, I'm here for questions.
I'll ask the first question.
Yes, sir.
Why did we pick 4?
Because we just passed some code that says you can have an RV, a utility trailer, and a boat. That sounds like 3. At the time, Olympia was talking about putting provisions in code for there to be an allowance for 2 RVs per lot. So 4 seemed like the right number. It's completely discretionary. If you would like to pick a different number, you can. But I think for reasons that I mentioned, that seems like we're talking about 3 anyway, and it seemed if somebody had an extra vehicle, we're at 4.
Okay. So if somebody's backyard had an RV, a boat, and a trailer, and 1 car,
You're good.
that'd be fine. If they had an RV, a boat, and a trailer, and no car, the neighbor who wants to take the picture, it's fine. Is that what that's,
Yes, sir. And if there was an RV, a boat, and a trailer, and 2 cars, or a truck and a car, there'd be a problem.
something
And
would have to move.
they'd have to move one of the vehicles.
So how many instances other than this picture from one neighbor's backyard do we have in Federal Way?
I'm gonna say there's probably a few. I don't have a quantifiable number for you. But right now, backyards are kind of off limits for us in terms of code compliance.
Since I work with the code enforcement officers a lot, I'll tell you that this situation is pretty widespread.
Is it widespread? Okay, so what are we gonna do? I've got my life savings in my cars in that backyard. I mean, I'm just, whatever. Why they have the cars, I don't know. And we put this in ordinance, where are they gonna move them? Out in the front yard? I mean, not in the yard, but in the street. So what's the next step after we move them from the backyard to the street?
Well, if they're in the street and they're inoperable, they're gonna get towed.
Right, but
Because
if
that's
you-
violating a different code.
But if you move them, you know, it used to be, and maybe I'm wrong, we've changed it, you know, you move them a foot, then they've been moved, and you got another 3 days, and, I mean, we had a instance of this in a neighborhood, can't remember where it was, where the guy had 8 Thunderbirds or whatever it
Yeah.
was, and they just kept moving them back and forth every day or every 3 days, and
And some people will do that. I think a lot of people, people have opportunities to get vehicles, or they have family members who are no longer driving, or whatever the case is. If you have to now move those every day, there may be an added incentive for you to maybe dispose of some of those vehicles as opposed to just keeping them in your property.
I was also just going to add that many of these vehicles are also unlicensed, and that's also a violation.
on the street,
Correct, yes.
but they're not in violation on license in your backyard.
Actually, they are also in your backyard. The thing is that it's difficult for to Keith's earlier point, it's difficult for code enforcement officers to get into a backyard or to get a vantage point where they can determine conclusively that a vehicle is unlicensed in the backyard. So
Right.
regardless of whether it's on the street, backyard, front yard, side yard, wherever it might be, unlicensed is a code violation. It's just a question of the practicality of enforcing that in a backyard.
Yeah, like this picture, you can't see any of the license plates.
Right.
You can't see if some of them are up on blocks. It's difficult to actually do anything with this photograph.
No, I understand that, but
Yeah.
are we gonna put our code officers in jeopardy going behind the house to look at cars? Are they gonna need an officer to go with them? I mean, this is a whole different world. If it's in the front, now we're going in the backyard, and they
Sure.
got their Rottweiler running around back there, and they don't answer the door, and,
So technically now, if that person who took that photograph and sent it in wants to send it in with a complaint, the code compliance officer would contact that person and say, I need to be able to see those. Can I come up into your house and do that? So they would need to be invited in to do that if ultimately this wanted to go to that next step. They're still not going to go in that guy's backyard without his permission, his or her permission.
Right.
I think the point is that it's easier to count up to 4 from an adjoining property than it is to like look at license plates and see if it's inoperable or not. That's the
But we
idea.
wouldn't be looking for that if the neighbor hadn't sent a picture. We wouldn't know it's there.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other
I have a
questions? Go ahead,
I have a
Susan.
question.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. So currently, you can have cars parked in the front of the house, but it cannot be on the grass, is that correct?
That is correct.
But in the backyard, it could be on the grass?
No, but the problem is, again,
Yes, it actually can be on the grass in the back.
oh,
Yep.
I thought it had to be
Under-
on a
Under
pad.
current code.
Okay,
So then if a car has an oil leak or something that's causing an issue, environmental issue, then what happens?
today? Today,
If it would be in the backyard, parked on the grass?
sure. Today, if a vehicle was leaking transmission fluid or oil and it was infiltrating into the yard, we would never know. If it was running off property into, say, a storm drain, we typically check our storm drains for pollutants, so it could be found that way.
Or a neighbor's yard?
Yeah, that would probably be a legal trespass. There's also probably public nuisance provisions in the code that would cover that type of a situation, where it's leaking and it's leaking into the neighbor's yard. That would probably be a public nuisance already under our code.
Okay, thank you.
I personally think we're opening up a can of worms to where we're going to end these out front in the street. And then we got another whack-a-mole. I mean, you know, we're going to get the call, hey, there's 3 cars in front, and then,
We get those now.
I know, so, I mean, if this is widespread in the city, I mean, have we only had one call like this? Or how many can you remember in the last year?
There's definitely been a handful in the past year that I can think of. When I said widespread earlier, perhaps that's
Half a
too
dozen.
strong of a term. There's a few of them around the city for sure. Yeah.
And do you think it's going to be a budget, how much more is it going to cost us to now enforce this?
This shouldn't cost any additional.
Yeah.
It's just adding to another complaint we can follow up on.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Is this going to go to consent agenda, or is it go to?
First read.
First reading, and then you can go through this presentation again,
Yes.
and maybe have a little bit more facts? I mean.
Facts?
Well.
What kind of
Well-
facts
well-
would you like, committee
well-
chair?
Well, I mean, I understand the issue, and I'm not opposed to it, but every time somebody sends a picture in, and now we're reacting with a new ordinance. And so, we wouldn't even be talking about this ordinance, not saying that the person who sent this in doesn't have a legitimate beef, but we've never had it on our radar in how many years we've been a city. And are we starting to set the precedence that somebody sends something in and then we react and make a new ordinance because of a neighbor issue instead of a real city issue? I mean,
So I
That's-
think I'll channel the mayor for a second, because I think this is what he would say, is there are a number of things that property owners do or don't do on their property that affects the stability of neighborhoods and the valuation of private property. And, you know, if this person who took this photo was trying to sell their house, and as potential buyers came into this bedroom and looked out for the view of the window and saw that they had basically a used car lot next to
Right.
them,
Right.
I think that's going to affect what they can potentially get for their house. And I think the question is do we as a city feel like we have some obligation to try and maintain neighborhood stability, and is this eroding neighborhood stability? So I think he'd put it in that light, and whether you agree with that or not, don't know, but that's, I think,
Yeah.
the way he would address this.
But how many other type things like this are we gonna, what's the next one?
Well, I think you could say like overgrown lawns in the front. We already do a lot of this already in terms of kind of these neighborhood blight issues.
Yeah, what I'd say is that we get a lot of complaints about a lot of things that are or are not actually code violations. Rarely, in circumstances like this, we get a complaint where something is not a code violation under our current code, and we say, wow, that really should be a violation. And so I think this is one of those unique circumstances where it's a complaint that triggered us realizing our parking code has a giant hole in it as it pertains to this particular issue. So maybe that alleviates some of the concern about us writing an ordinance every time somebody complains, because I agree that that would also be problematic.
Can I suggest one other thing to add?
Of course.
An airplane? I mean, you got an RV, a boat, and a car, so let's say some guy's in his backyard redoing his airplane. I mean, you get to 4, now if you, I mean, you may laugh at that, but.
I think your yard's bigger
there's a
than
lot of
mine.
There's people that get back there and they're working on their
Sure.
hobby of their,
I do actually believe that the definition of vehicle would technically include an airplane or a helicopter. So I believe this would apply to that.
I mean, if we're gonna make it 4, let's make it 4 of some mechanical things.
I will check and see if the definition includes that to make sure we're covered.
Okay.
So,
Counsel.
Thank you, Chair. So Keith, I'll just try to make sure that I understand this. So currently, we don't have any rule in the book of limiting of how many cars you can park at your residence, right?
Yep.
I see.
And I think at some point, and there's a tipping point, Councilmember Tran, and I don't know where it is. You know, we picked 4 for this backyard, which means there could also be a couple in the driveway or 4 in the driveway if the driveway's long. There also could be 2 on parking pads in the front. So at some point, when does this just start to feel like a car lot or a junkyard? And I don't know where the right number is. That's where I think it is completely discretionary. But if you've got 4 vehicles in the back and potentially 2 or 3 in the front, it feels like there's a lot of vehicles on the property. And for someone who might say, I've got an extended family and everybody's got a car, well, okay, there should be the allowance to have them either there or on the street, to Councilmember Dovey's point, without having to, rent a space on a storage lot somewhere for the vehicles. So, again, there's 11 here, by the way. It's hard to count them, but there's pretty much 11 in this backyard, and that seems like that's too many. So wherever you want to go with this, again, this is about trying to keep neighbors from getting really prickly at their neighbors.
Well, they're already prickly, they sent the picture, right?
Yep.
But you made an interesting comment. 4 in the backyard, and then you just said, I got a long driveway, I get 4 more.
Yep.
I mean, don't we need to be a little bit more restrictive?
So,
I mean, now we're saying it's okay to have 8.
So in the front yard, we don't have a numeric number that says you can only have 4 in the red area as up there /red area /driveway. We don't have a number, but we have a lot of things that essentially limit the number of vehicles that you can park in the front of the house. For instance, you can't park on grass in the front of the house. You have to park in a driveway or approved parking pad. The driveway can only be a certain width, right? We have a lot of things that functionally, even though they don't set a cap on it, they limit how many cars you can park in the front. We could, of course, adopt a number for the front as well. That is an option that the council could take. But I think generally, and I won't speak for the policy inputters here, but I think generally people think that cars in a front yard are less of a problem in terms of property values and impact on neighbors than they are parked on grass in the background. But, that's up to you guys to decide whether you agree with that or not.
Can we add something to this? One thing that I always see is they park these cars and then they let the grass grow. You could have 3 and then you look at the wheels and it's 3 feet high around the car. I mean,
Yeah, so technically that is actually a
Is
code
that part of this
violation.
ordinance?
Te-
They have
so-
to maintain the area?
Technically, that is actually already a code violation. You can't have untrimmed vegetation over 6 inches high.
In the
your-
backyard?
On the property, period. So what you just described there would already be a code violation of a different piece of code, because it'd be over height vegetation.
So like this picture, if you go back to it, chances are it's already in violation unless the guys are running his lawnmower and his weed eater around these things all the time.
Perhaps, it looks actually relatively short, at least in the
I mean, it looks
picture for
short
the
here
Dodge.
by the wheel, but I mean, I'm just, if we're gonna do the ordinance, shouldn't we make it really tighter than just 4? I mean, I still see a bunch of cars, 4 here, 4 in the front, some in the street. You know, all we're doing is moving them.
Well, so the ones in the front, and I guess, again, back to the ones in the front, and the reason why this doesn't come up that often is the ones in the front, if there's vegetation growing around the vehicles in the front, if they're unlicensed, if they're up on blocks with the motors pulled, all of those things are existing code violations, and code compliance can ticket the property owner for those. So that keeps those vehicles in the front fairly manageable. We do have, just to be candid, we have a property owner in town. He's got all sorts of stuff. He built a 6-foot fence around the perimeter of his property so we can't see into his yard to see what he's got in there. So there's all sorts of things going on in town, but they are, when you think about a city of, 37,000 households, it's a small number that we're dealing with here. But I think the question is what should you expect from your neighbor? And do we as government have at least some obligation to try and keep it within the rails?
I have a question, if it's okay.
You can, yeah, let's go right ahead.
Keith, what do other cities have? Do they have this issue, and how do they address it?
I have not seen a regulation in the backyard for another city. I don't know, Kent, if you've seen anything.
I'm not sure. Cities deal with their parking on residential properties differently, I would say. So I'm not sure is the answer.
I mean, that's something that is a good question, Councilmember Honda. I think if I'm more than happy to spend some time reading some other codes. Whether this comes back to LUTC, there's no witching hour on this one. If you guys want to bring it back and have staff do a little bit more, I can chase that down and see what I can find in terms of some other cities and whether they're regulating total number of vehicles, period, or if they're segregating out front yard, backyard, kind of like what ours is potentially doing.
I would be interested in that information.
What if they're running they got an acre in their backyard
Yeah.
and, they don't have neighbors, but we still have a bunch of cars. Are we gonna go look for them or?
So if we can't see in the backyard, we're not gonna, again, this is not something, we can't go in the backyard without somebody's permission. So unless somebody is going to identify that person on the acre has a bunch of vehicles in their backyard and can get us a vantage point to see it, then the answer is no. They can have 20 vehicles in the backyard. They can fit them.
What if they're fixing cars or they got a temporary, it's a mechanic in his garage and these cars are coming and going?
Yep, that happens in town too.
Yeah.
And so, the thing about it is, it's difficult for us to prove. So, we had a situation, ultimately, we ended up calling all the neighbors into a meeting to just talk it over because there were people were alleging that this property owner was running a mechanic shop out of his house. He was swearing up and down to code compliance that they were his relatives' cars that he was working on, which therefore was not a business. He wasn't taking money. So there was a lot of conversation to be had. So this does happen.
Okay. Well, do you want to move it forward or do you want to get more information?
Well, personally, I'm fine with the proposal. I think it's reasonable to limit number of cars that people can park in their backyard. I mean, I don't want to be the neighbors that next to the picture in here. That definitely will impact the value of my house, for example. So I'm fine of moving forward, and hopefully, when we have other council members present, they will,
Okay. I'm not opposed to moving it forward. They'll just be prepared for some more questions when, because there's only two of us here.
Yes. And I wrote down.
And two online, so.
And I wrote down some questions, and so I will definitely include that information in the presentation at council.
Yeah, I find it interesting, if there's no other cities doing anything like this, is this something we really want to be the leader in? Maybe.
While I had a little bit of time, I quickly Googled, and I think I found the answer for Tacoma, at least. And for Tacoma, it's, believe it or not, no more than 4 vehicles.
Okay, well, good.
So
Good.
one for one in the one city I've checked.
Okay, well, let's give a motion.
Okay, well, with that, I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on June 17, 2025.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we get to go to Crisis Recovery Center Code Amendments. This is for information only.
Yeah, so I came before you guys last month, and we talked about whether you guys, after having a couple conversations, wanted to have some code written up, and the answer was yes. So here we are a month later, and I wanted to kind of check in and see if we're heading in the right direction before we work our way to Planning Commission and then back to LUTC. So this conversation, as you remember, started with discussion about 822 South 333rd Street. There was a presentation by both Connections Healthcare and then Emerald City Behavioral Health, and led us to want to address that type of a facility a little bit more closely. So right now in city code, those type of facilities are regulated under a definition for convalescent center. And convalescent center means an inpatient facility excluding facilities defined as hospitals for patients who are recovering from an illness or who are receiving care for chronic conditions, mental, physical, emotional, or developmental disabilities, terminal illness, or alcohol or drug treatment, and may include assisted living. So that's the existing definition for convalescent center. We would suggest adding it to include something called a crisis recovery center. So it would say that basically both hospitals and crisis recovery centers are not convalescent centers, which then means we need a definition for crisis recovery center. So suggesting means a secure or semi-secure facility. So that's part of the conversation we had with Emerald City, was this is a place that you go in and you can't just walk out. And so it's either secure, semi-secure facility that may include places of stabilization, treatment, and evaluation for 24 hours or up to 7 days, offering access to mental health and substance use care. These facilities operate similar to a hospital emergency department that accepts walk-ins, referrals, and first responder drop-offs. That was another thing we heard, is that EMTs could drop someone off here as opposed to at the hospital emergency room. Services may include, but are not limited to, triage crisis response, interventions and evaluations that address both mental health and substance use disorders in individuals experiencing a mental health crisis, crisis assessment and counseling, crisis intervention plan development, medication management, and linkage and referral to other services as applicable. So that would be the proposed new definition. So this was the map we looked at last time. So right now, convalescent centers, and the reason why it looks like so many different places in the city, is it's basically all up and down Pack Highway in our commercial zones. It's around City Hall, in our office park zones, And then it's straggling out here to the west end of the city because it's also in our multifamily zones. So right now, convalescent centers are in all those places. And what I'm suggesting is we pull out multifamily, and then we also add a quarter-mile separation from a public school. And that's something that you guys did with emergency shelters, is you said we don't want those right next to public schools. And for these type of facilities where they're basically a semi-lockdown mental health care crisis center, it seems like we might also want a separation from public schools. So when you add, and the map here shows where the public schools are, and right now we're defining those as anything that's operated by Federal Way Public School System, to be clear on what we're talking about. That leaves us with basically kind of a small area in the middle of the city where these things would be allowed, little strip up here on Pack Highway North, and then Pape's location on the east side of I-5. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you put in daycare centers or charter schools, something like that, instead of just public schools?
Because, well, one, it's harder to make sure we've gotten them all. And it might mean that there is no land left for these if we add those additional types of facilities.
But there's
So-
probably no difference between the risk factor if we're doing this because of risk in public schools and children, when we're talking about like established daycare centers that are, in the buildings and have 30, 40 kids and things like that.
So we're having a conversation now so that we
Okay.
can dial this in
Got
right.
it.
So
Okay.
if the committee feels strongly about that, I'll go back to the drawing board. We'll try and locate all the, private daycares or private schools, add them to this and see if there's anywhere left for them to go.
Well,
And there may not be, frankly.
it may not be, but it'd be worth knowing.
Yeah, we can do that.
So I have a question.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. So we currently have a mental health facility across from the day center and located right next to a daycare center. They share a fence.
Yeah, we have there's 8 of them in the city, by the way. So before I started writing the definition, I looked at what we actually had in the city, and there's, and I'm looking for my piece of paper that tells me, but there's 8 mental health care businesses currently in the city. Some of them are down on 336 close to First on the south side of the street. They're basically offices within business parks. And some of it, and then I'll let you get to your question, Councilmember, my apologies for jumping in, but a lot of them, we don't even know they're there. And so part of the reason why I wrote the definition the way I did was because what I tried to key on was some of the reaction that I think council had during the presentations, which one was, it's people that are having a crisis, as opposed to maybe someone who has an alcohol problem who's going to check themselves into substance rehab in kind of a more white-collar office medical situation. So I'm going to stop talking and let you ask your question. My apologies.
Oh, no problem. That's very interesting. So would this be mental health facilities that only have overnight care, or mental health facilities that do counseling in the daytime and people come and go?
Well, so that's a great question, and we need to figure out where we want to draw the line, because it's not so much the land use code that I think is a problem. It's the licensing portion of this, because the second part of this is once we get the land use code figured out, the next thing is we have to, what I heard the council say is they wanted a license similar to what we require for permanent supportive housing and emergency shelter. So the licensing, and when I read through the licensing provisions for those type of facilities, a lot of it had to do with residents. Now, the way I define this is it could be somebody just coming in for an appointment, or to come down from a crisis, which might be, something that happens over a few hours. But it could be somebody who's there for up to a week while they're getting medication and therapy to kind of come to grips with maybe what's going on in their lives. So there are potentially, I don't want to call them residents because you're not really taking up residency here, but you are definitely here for more than one day potentially because of the treatment that you need.
It could just be called overnight treatment or something similar. So are the eight facilities that you found, are they, do they have overnight beds?
They do not.
So just the one by the daycare center across from the day center
Yes.
has overnight beds?
Yes, as far as I can tell.
Okay,
They don't really,
Okay.
when you read their web pages, you have to kind of like wade through a lot of different words.
all right, thanks.
Yep. So I guess the question for you all is, are we on the right page? I heard Council Member Dovey ask for, take a look at what private schools and daycares will do to the distribution map.
It would seem to me like, I don't know how many private schools there are, but, we got the one around the corner, Goddard, which is
Yep.
private. And you got, I don't know, Spring Valley and Brook Lake and all these different ones, but we should look at those. They are schools, same as a public. And then I think you should look at daycares. It's not maybe the daycares that are in homes, but it's
The commercial daycares.
The commercial daycares, because we are trying to get more of those and we should at least know what it looks like.
Sure. I can definitely do that.
And the other thing that's kind of interesting as we keep moving along, the presentations we had, one was the King County bond was going to be their money piece,
Yep,
and this other one is going to be Medicare,
yep.
and Medicare is facing big cuts potentially. So they may come back and say, hey, we can't do it anymore because Medicare won't pay for it. I mean, I don't know. It all comes down to where the dollars come from, right?
Absolutely. And this one may be a more, but if we get this figured out now,
Yeah, it'd be good.
we'll be ready when somebody does come through the door.
Okay. Any other questions out there? Anybody? Okay,
All right, thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you all four of you.
thank you. I do have, we'll move on to other, because I do have one question. And this, this happens to do with potholes. And the only reason I bring it up is, I'm sure people call in all the time about potholes, right? Well, I'm gonna call in about the one on the roundabout by Warehouser Way, when you make the circle around. Are you familiar with that huge pothole there?
Not off the top of my head. Which
Well,
roundabout are you talking about?
The very first one we put in by Warehouser, the old Warehouser building, that first roundabout, as you're coming around to go underneath the freeway, as you're coming, anyway, there's a huge pothole there that you could almost sink your car
In the roundabout itself?
in the roundabout on the inside.
Okay, we'll get someone to take a look at it.
You might want to look at it.
Will do.
I hit it the other day. Okay, let's see, anything else anybody have to bring up? Oh, I do have one other. A citizen called, and Keith left, but this has to do with Safeway, the one that just closed. Do we have any policy, or how do we deal with people dumping things in back of vacant buildings like that and turning them into a garbage dump?
Yes, that's addressed by code enforcement. Again, that would be illegal dumping is what it would be called, and we issue citations and/or notices of violations to the owners of the property, usually, i.e. sum it up in corporate in that situation.
So, well, a citizen called and suggested that people were dumping behind the old Safeway. Since Safeway's not there, we wouldn't call them up probably and say, hey, there's a problem.
We call the property owner.
We call the property order. Do we randomly go check those things, or do we wait for someone to call and say, we got a
Usually-
couple old chairs in the back of the building?
Usually complaint-based. You know, if a code enforcement officer drives by and sees it in plain sight, they're going to do something about it, but usually it's complaint-based.
So we might want to put that on our route of a code enforcement person. I guess I was just told that there's a lot of stuff going behind the Safeway that just closed.
I'll pass it on to Keith. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have anything else they'd like to bring up? Seeing none, we'll get our next meeting will be July 7th, right after we have our 4th of July party. So we'll now adjourn.